They're here from last week. So back we have Amanda Fallin-Bennett, Jeremy Biard, Jimmy Chadwell, Ashley Berkshire, and Ty Ugumbekun. So welcome back to our speakers. And I'm going to turn it over to Amanda Fallin-Bennett.
Hi, thank you, John. Thanks everybody for having us back. So I guess it would take a little bit too long for all 50 of us to introduce ourselves, but if you wouldn't mind to put in the chat what your profession is, what role, and what county you're with, it would be great so that we could see who all we have here with us today. And this, like John said, this is a Q&A about peer support practices. So we have some questions that have already been submitted that we're going to go through, but please put any questions you have in the chat, or we'd love for this to be a discussion. So if you are a peer support specialist and you want to answer also, please, feel free to jump in. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And then before we get going, none of us have any financial relationships to disclose, but I am the co-founder of Voices of Hope. So that, yeah, thanks, John. So we'll go over this pretty quick because it's, the same also as last week. Peer support specialists are individuals with substance use disorder with experience in recovery. They provide strengths-based support based on their own lived experience. And the field has been growing really rapidly. Georgia was actually the first in 1999 to start billing for peer support. And now over half of all places that provide substance use disorder treatment employ peers. So it's grown really rapidly, which has led to a lot of great and wonderful things, and also some just some challenges that we're still working through. So I'm happy to talk about that today. So we're going to talk about the roles and functions of a peer support specialist, some best practices for training and supervision, and ways to hopefully increase connection across the state. Hopefully after this, we'll recognize the importance of peer support specialists in provision of services, recognize appropriate job functions, and recognize the importance of creating supportive spaces for peer support specialists. So yeah, this was just a summary. Like I said, we're going to, I hope for all of you who were here with us last week, we're going to just take the questions that you submitted, but also I hope that this will just turn into a rich discussion. And so I'm going to start, lead us off just talking about what research there is available. And so I will go ahead and talk through a couple slides. So we do know that recovery support services work in terms of that there have been studies that show that peer support is linked to a variety of outcomes, which I'll go over pretty quickly on these next few slides. So the way that peer support services are designed to work, the way all recovery support services work traditionally is it's geared around the concept of recovery capital. So recovery capital are all the resources that somebody could bring to bear to support their recovery. So these could be like physical, tangible things like having housing, having their basic needs met. They can be things like education, your workforce, your skills, your ability to get back into the workforce. Also social things, so things like having your family support, having support of other people in recovery in the recovery community, and then also community recovery capital. And so we talked last time about how, as an example, having your community be open to medications for opioid use disorder is a type of recovery capital. And so the way peer support works is it's designed to improve someone's recovery capital, which there's a lot of evidence that this predicts sustained recovery. And this is something that is the case regardless of whether someone is in active use or not. So even if, from a harm reduction perspective, improving someone's recovery capital is also associated with positive outcomes. And so there is evidence that peer support services reduce substance use in general, can improve adherence to treatment, and reduce hospitalizations, as well as improve relationships with healthcare providers. This is a big one that you read about when you want to know about the research. Of one of the things that can be helpful for peer support specialists who are embedded in certain settings is that it can be easier to build a trusted relationship sometimes with a peer support specialist. So having a peer support on staff is something that can help improve relationships with other types of healthcare providers, increases hopefulness, improves quality of life, and increases community integration. So that was that from me. And there's lots of peer sports specialists here, and there's a panel that came with me that are peer sports specialists, and I am not a peer sports specialist. So I think that it would be great to hear not so much from me and hear more from people who are experts in this area in their own fields. I'm happy to have so many of my friends and colleagues here with me who can answer these questions for you all, and I hope we can have a great discussion. So I'm going to start with Jimmy for this question. If you could just really briefly introduce yourself, and then I'd like if you could take the question that peer support specialists work across a variety of settings. So can you just tell us, some examples for like here at Voices, how peer support specialists work across these types of settings?
Yes, absolutely. So like Amanda was saying, my name is Jimmy Chadwell. I'm a Wave 1 program manager here at Voices of Hope. I was a recovery coach at a syringe service program in Franklin County during Wave 1, and a lead recovery coach and a program coordinator. So I've occupied quite a few different roles, but I have experience in peer support. Thanks for calling us experts, Amanda. That makes me feel better before I start speaking here. So a little confidence boost, I guess. And like Amanda was saying, so the roles vary, and they can be in different types of settings, like MOUD clinics, syringe service programs, jail settings, probation and parole, a lot of different types of settings. And I know we have Wave 2 recovery coaches on here that are excited about finding out where they'll be placed eventually. So like I was saying, I had experience at a syringe service program setting, where individuals that frequented the setting would come in. If they were interested in recovery support services, we could sign them up for recovery coaching. We have recovery coaches in jail settings that would do the same thing. They interact with the residents there, in different jails that we're placed at, like Madison County Detention Center, Boyd County Detention Center. So the recovery coaches will interact with the residents that are interested in recovery support services, and do everything we can do to increase their recovery capital. In MOUD clinics, we refer to those as retention program settings, for HEAL and sustainability specifically. So the goal there is, the clients of the facilities are already on medication treatment. We want to retain them into the treatment by helping them again to increase the recovery capital by barrier removal, helping with housing assistance, transportation issues, any barrier that they see or experience to staying in recovery or beginning the recovery journey. So with linkage, it's more focused on connecting the individuals to a provider or a treatment option or resources to begin the recovery journey. And then in our retention settings, individuals are usually either have already started their recovery journey with the treatment, and we're kind of trying to keep them into whatever their desired treatment option is. And really the idea that I like to drive home when I'm explaining what peer support is to someone that doesn't know much about it is that it's supposed to be person-centered. So whatever the individual's motivation is to get in recovery, or whatever their recovery path that they've chosen is, we want to amplify their motivation, and really just guide them and support them while they are working toward whatever their recovery goal is in that particular recovery path that they've chosen. So I'm not going to come into the peer support relationship and say, hey, you need to do this, this, and this. I want to support and guide them through their own plans. And help them to develop other goals and work on strengthening their recovery capital.
Thank you, Jimmy. And so you did mention that, you as a peer support specialist work with people across multiple pathways. And so certainly, since everyone here is joining the Healing Community Study KY Open, hear a lot about probably the medication pathway, but maybe a little bit less about what it looks like to work with someone on a harm reduction pathway. And so would you mind to just expand for people on the call, like what it means to have a peer support relationship with someone like in a syringe service program who is, for example, in active use and wants to use a harm reduction pathway of recovery?
Yes, absolutely. Particularly at the syringe service program, a lot of individuals are still using, and they may be searching for ways to use safer. We have safer injection flyers that we can go over that teaches someone which type of angle to inject in, how to rotate sites, to use all clean, sterile equipment. So a lot of the individuals that would frequent the syringe service program, for instance, they may not be interested in completely ceasing use in the moment or, that day. So it's really just providing all the tools that we can while we interact with the participants. So again, like giving them sterile supplies, harm reduction strategies as far as using goes, ways to moderate use, and supporting them while they're doing that, because again, it's person-centered. So just because I may come from an abstinent background or another individual may come from a medication treatment background, I'm not going to force that on the participant. If they want to go with harm reduction and moderate use, great. Let's work on ways to successfully do that, right? Or if they want to try that harm reduction moderation path for a while and then move into abstinence, that's great. That's a goal that they've identified. So whatever their motivation is, if it's just to be on a harm reduction path or just to be on an abstinence path, we want to just amplify that motivation that they already have existing and support it in the best way we can.
Thank you, Jimmy. So Jeremy, could you talk about working in these different settings? There's different challenges in different settings. So could you speak about challenges that you might find in like a traditional healthcare setting, like an ER, a syringe service program, or the criminal legal settings?
Of course. Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Jeremy Byard, certified peer support specialist here in Kentucky. Have operated as a peer support specialist. I've also supervised peer support specialists over the years. So I've actually worked and trained in a lot of these settings. And I would say one of the challenges that I could say is like an overarching challenge in working in various, spaces could just be the cultures there in the different settings, whether that is, whether that might be language folks use or just maybe like movements. Like when you're oftentimes in the criminal legal system, if you are in a prison or a jail, you don't get to just move around that facility at your leisure. Same thing with, hospitals and things, like there are places in the hospital, you're in the ED, things are moving really fast and you are kind of to be out of the way. I mean, there's some really intense work going on. And so sometimes managing, where is my place in the world? Like some of the challenges for me were like, okay, I don't know what to do with my hands kind of thing at the moment. Like, okay, all this is going on. I'm trying to be helpful, kind of knowing what our scope is. Sometimes that can be challenging. And also having supervisors at these locations that also understand and adhere to the scope of work that peers are doing. Oftentimes we can be asked to pitch in and help, whether that's fill in a gap or do something that needs to be done at a very time sensitive kind of manner. And we always want to be team players, but there are things that, like administering your analysis on a regular interval or regular schedule is something that we don't need to be doing with our scope of work. And we don't want to really create this dynamic of having some sort of power differential with the people we serve. Some other challenges can just be, thinking about the syringe service program. Sometimes folks are in a hurry, right? They're coming to this program to get the services that they need, whether that is the clean utensils, whether that's information, maybe it's naloxone, maybe it's all of them. But they're taking a break out of their day and maybe they have to go back to work, but the engagements are often much shorter. And so how do we build rapport? How do we recognize that the setting is different? That's sometimes the challenge, is coming from one setting to another. And realizing the nuances and differences in those settings. Things like that I have found to be challenges and barriers that we've had to kind of work through, whether that's, personally work through those or work through those as teams. And I would love to hear some of the other challenges anybody else wanted to add.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you are a peer support specialist, if you have some thoughts, you want to put in the chat about challenges that you've had. not necessarily not with a specific agency, but perhaps a specific type of agency. So if you've had any kind of struggles in like, various settings, obviously we don't want to talk about any specific agencies. But Ashley supervises a team of peers who are specifically working in the criminal legal system settings, which I think can sometimes have particular challenges. And Ashley, is there anything you would add to some of the challenges that the coaches you supervise see?
Yeah, I mean, I would kind of, I agree with Jeremy where he talks about like the culture of when you're working at like a jail, the culture there is very different than like say Voices of Hope. I mean, there's like like kind of like a hierarchy when it comes to like a jail, but we're there as like a peer, and sometimes we're having to deal with like with the guards and everything, and also just the fact of you can't just move around easy in a jail, like Jeremy was saying. Also, you have to have someone let you in places. It's very hard sometimes to schedule visits with clients, but yeah, there's a whole lot of different challenges for jails.
Can I add one thing when we're like thinking about the culture and some of the challenges, like the one that as Ashley was talking, like came up, and this happened at various settings, at a lot of these settings, minus the SSPs, but it trying to have the conversation, because it goes back to the culture of sometimes people will see us as peer support specialists and they see us now, kind of thriving in our lives or moving in this direction of health. And sometimes it's hard for people to see us as the people we serve and one and the same. Like, oh, I can't believe that you were ever, in the grips of your addiction, or, well, you're different than these people. And really wanting to treat folks in a different manner than they would treat me or one of our workers. And so really trying to help kind of assimilate or bring folks along with that, or sometimes having our opinions even valued in various team settings with community partners. Sometimes that's another one that I didn't want to miss is that I've been silenced before because I was a peer and not a counselor. And so sometimes those things can be very challenging, and just kind of knowing and having a place to go with those challenges is, part of that best practice.
Thank you all for sharing that. And we have in the chat that some people have faced challenges where they're in certain settings like criminal legal system, where perhaps there are places where they're not just not accepting, but not permitted, someone to be on medication. So that could be a challenge if someone wants to be on that recovery pathway and they're not able. And then we have someone saying that maintaining boundaries as a peer support specialist can be challenging. And that's certainly true. And we discussed that a lot last week as well. And so thank you all for sharing those experiences. Another thing that can happen in certain settings, and this transitions into another question that was submitted, but another thing that can happen is that many people who are in recovery from substance use disorders have had personal traumas in their life, but then the job itself can be very heavy. Obviously, there are lots of difficult things can happen. I mean, you're working in a place where you might lose your participants, as an example, to an overdose or other things. And some of these are high stress settings, being in an emergency department or a certain service program or being in a detention center. And so we're going to transition into the next question. And so Jeremy, could you answer this one? So could you talk about, sorry, John, move one more ahead because I'm just transitioning to that one. So the question was, it sounds like many peers have experienced trauma themselves, and there can be a lot of secondary trauma in the work. So Jeremy, could you talk about that a little bit? And then what strategies you would use to ensure that you're taking care of yourself and your coworkers?
Yeah, great question. And really great question, because we do know, the correlation between trauma and addiction is very strong, very, very high numbers, right? It even rivals, or sometimes is even stronger than diabetes and obesity. And so it's a likely chance that if you're a peer support specialist, there's some trauma in your life. I know for myself that I have an extensive list of trauma, capital T and lowercase t traumas. And so thinking about that and thinking about how we hear of other folks' crisis and emergencies and traumas that they've experienced, and sometimes they've experienced the same exact trauma that we have, and so that can be arousing or triggering for us sometimes. And how do we, what do we do with that is very important. And does our team and do our supervision sessions and our supervisors have space and create safe spaces for us to talk through these types of challenges or these types of triggers that come up? And it's extremely important, especially if you're a supervisor and you're thinking about, your workforce. That's the greatest asset that we have, is our workforce. And so how do we, take care of our workers is very important. And so some of the strategies that I've been able to do when I was a peer support and as a supervisor, I can talk to a little bit. And some of my strategies are, knowing my signs of what's going on in my body when I start to feel triggered or I start to take on someone else's trauma, and also kind of knowing myself and knowing what goes on in my body, whether that's my voice changing or my neck getting red or whatever the things that I notice when I'm taking on, someone else's trauma as secondary trauma or tertiary trauma. And really being able to distill out, because sometimes, especially even as a supervisor, like looking in and seeing an interaction and maybe someone is upset, you can visibly see that they're upset or that, something is happening emotionally there. And it could be that they're being the peer, that we're being empathetic and we are just there with the person and feeling, sad or feeling all of those emotions with that person and for that person. And then there are other times where I'm actually re-examining my own traumatic experiences because of what I heard. And then my emotional state is actually a result from my trauma and from me reliving that or rehashing that in my own mind. And so being able to kind of tease that out is my response. What are my responses, right? And a really great, sharp therapist has helped me over the years to be able to kind of hone in these skills and be able to then use grounding when I am kind of emotionally aroused, being able to ground myself, being able to get bilateral stimulation, right? Being left brain, right brain kind of working at the same time. Those things tend to calm me down. And sometimes going into situations and having a plan, right? Like we talk about RAP plans and all the plans that for the folks that we serve, but how do we have a plan for ourselves? If we know that we've had certain types of trauma, or we know that when these subjects come up, we feel a certain way or get emotionally charged in such a way, how do we have a plan? When this happens, if this happens, this is what I'll do. I think that has been a big component for our teams is, having some sort of plan in place, to where not having a plan sometimes can create anxiety. So how can we be, proactive and not always just reactive? So how can we set ourselves up to be more successful, even if we get triggered? And then that's one way, is being able to have some sort of idea of what you will do, who you will go to, and what is the proper channels, right? Maybe it's not coming back to work and around the scuttlebutt or the drinking fountain and talking about all of this stuff, and then maybe furthering that onto somebody else who now is triggered in their own way, right? Having a mechanism of when this happens, you're going to talk to your supervisor, you're going to talk to your lead peer, you're going to, whatever that is for you all, but having that plan in place is very important, I think, because we just don't know what we don't know. We don't know, sometimes it can be a scary place for us, because when that box gets open, sometimes we don't know exactly how we will react. And I think being able to ground ourselves, be able to go into it prepared, maybe do a meditation beforehand or even after, things like that. Just any kind of mindfulness or having another person that we can process with is very, very important.
Thank you, Jeremy. And so we've had some people in the chat, sharing that maybe they've had similar things happen to them. And also someone has shared that at their site, they've had 3 participants that were released that overdosed recently, and that that things have been really hard on the job. And so I don't know if, based on this feedback, if you had anything else that you would just maybe want to say specifically that somebody might do to try to take care of themselves.
Thinking about, that particular one where we're in a climate and a landscape right now where we are losing people at record numbers. We all know that, right? And so if we're in this field and we're working in it, I think it's probably an accurate assumption that at some point we are going to lose somebody that we know, that we've worked with, that we love, somebody in our sphere of influence. We might become a casualty of the war on drugs. And so, well, again, like, what do we do with that? Like on my teams, whenever anyone experienced someone passing, we would have a debrief. We would call in an outside counselor that was not part of our team, and debrief and talk about that, and ongoing. It's not just, these things aren't just one-offs, right? This is ongoing maintenance that we do, kind of like changing the oil in your car or rotating your tires. Like, these are things that we constantly need to be doing because of the lives we've lived and because of the profession we're in. I think how we oftentimes we keep the wrong things private, and it can destroy us, right? Because, well, we don't want to bother other people. It's really affecting me, and I don't want to bother other people. That's a fear that comes up within me, and I've heard it countless others, that I don't want to burden somebody else, or I can deal with it on my own. And my strong encouragement is that we don't deal with these things on our own. That we need each other. We need each other to bounce things off of, to process, to connect. Because what I found also is oftentimes a lot of us in that room are feeling a very similar way, and that allows us to not feel alone as well, and be able to be compassionate with our team, and it actually kind of builds camaraderie within the teams.
Thank you for that response, and thank you to those of you in the chat who are sharing. And they're really sorry also to hear about those losses. And so we had someone else in the chat say that they had seen peer support specialists burn out due to being maybe silenced or overlooked in a treatment setting. And so, Jimmy, I was wondering if you could just speak to, because I know that you are in a position where you would supervise peers in multiple different agencies and settings around the state. And so what would you do if you felt like this was happening with a peer that you were supervising? How would you try to help address this?
Yeah, absolutely. So that stigma is going to be perpetuated in different settings and at different varying levels, I think. So that may contribute to like the silencing or being overlooked. And I think, your most profound and strongest voice that you can have is through your work. So if you're doing your due diligence to do your job and assist the participants as much as you can, I feel like it's going to naturally combat that, and that's going to be your biggest voice anyway, is like the work and the results that you have. There's always going to be individuals that don't necessarily agree with what we're doing, or even the idea of peer support. But if we're doing everything we can and we're trying to work ourselves out of a job, as Jeremy says, if I'm doing the best, offering the best peer support services I can, ideally I'm going to work myself out of a job, because there's not going to be any more recoveries to assist, right? At some point, it's probably not going to happen, but that's the goal, right? So as long as I'm doing all of the required tasks that are laid out in front of me, and I'm helping my participants to the utmost ability, that's going to be my strongest voice. As far as the burnout, I think it's important just like have those boundaries anyway in general. Like when I'm off work, I get off at 5. Ideally, my phone's off. I'm in a different position now, so it can't always be off. But if I'm up here when I get off work, I'm turning my phone off, right? because I can't pour out of an empty vessel. Like if I don't have any more energy to give, the energy I do give is not going to be at its highest level. And then again, like you can take solace in the fact that you're doing the best that you can. So if someone feels like that's not good enough, or if they're trying to silence you in whatever way or overlook you, your work can speak for itself.
That's great, Jimmy. Thank you. And I think some of it is a need for education on an agency's part. Because sometimes there are professionals who don't understand the role of a peer. And sometimes you'll hear people say that they perceive a peer support specialist to be like a friend, like someone who's coming in to be a friend of participants. And while that's inaccurate, because it would be inappropriate boundary wise, it's also not recognizing how highly trained peer support specialists are, in that they have just as much expertise as other health professionals. It might be different, but just as much. And so the more that we can do to help people understand the role of the peer support specialist, and hopefully these kinds of issues won't happen as much. And I'm sorry, John, that I skipped one of the questions. It just seemed like a good transition in between, but I'm going to go back just a little bit. And so, Ashley, would you be willing to share with us what strategies would you have? So you can see we're in a lot of different settings, like places like SSPs, detention centers. You may not have a whole lot of time to interact with somebody. So what strategies would you have if you're having maybe regular but brief interactions with somebody?
Yeah, in those situations, I mean, you really just got to make the most of your time with that participant. You want to make sure you really prepare ahead of time so that, you're not wasting any time when you're with them, trying to figure out what was going on last time that you talked to them. And you have to also just recognize that like these brief interactions, like continually having them can make a big impact. It may not feel like it if you're, just meeting with somebody for a couple of minutes here and there, but all those little minutes, they're all like planting seeds in that person. And you just got to make that the most of what you can get with them.
Sorry, I was having trouble unmuting myself for a second. And then Jimmy, I know you did work a while in a setting like that. If you have anything you'd want to add about how to make the most of brief but regular interactions.
I think Ashley pretty much hit it on the head. For our voices people, and I'd probably venture to say everyone on the call, if you have business cards, if you don't have time to have the full conversation that you would like to, or hit all the points that you would like to, you can always give someone a business card. They can call you at a later time when they have more time. So like the planning, like Ashley was talking about, comes into play there. So you can always like set up, subsequent times to talk with them later on, as opposed to just that first interaction. And then, if you're at a setting where you're going to be there regularly and they see that consistency, more than likely that if they want to interact and further their conversation with you, then they'll make time at a later date. Like they might not have it the first time you interact with them, but if they really feel like they can benefit from the services, ideally they're going to come back when they do have time. So business cards is a really helpful tool.
Can I add something, Amanda?
Yeah,
I think sometimes, like, especially when we know we are going to be working in a setting like an SSP where some of those interactions are going to be much shorter. I think if you can really focus on remembering some small details about that short interaction so that you can use them next time, whether that's if Jimmy's one of my participants and I know Jimmy's a sneakerhead, then like I'm gonna try to remember the sneakers he had on last time. I might even write a note to remind me, so when I am doing the prep work that Ashley's talking about, that I can jog, oh yeah, we had that really quick conversation about those sneakers. And so what that's going to do is it's going to lend itself to building that rapport and building some strong relationship with the person. And it's not just transactional, because I think that might be some of the fear here, is when we don't have enough time with people, it just becomes this transaction. And so and that's okay as long as we can make the most of that short interaction, right? I remembered their dog's name, so ask them how their dog's doing. And people, that goes a long way. I know for me, when I walk in someplace and somebody remembers something about me, I feel so important. Like, you remembered my name? Like, really? That is awesome. Like it just gives me a boost. And so if we can be that in those short interactions for someone, that's going to also lend itself to those more in-depth conversations and interactions in the future.
Thank you all. And we have, I'm going to put her on the spot. Shirley put in the chat that her time there is brief, but participants can request services through a cell tablet. Shirley, is there some, would you like to talk about that? Explain how that works to the group?
Yes, so here, here we have to go through like an attorney appointment website. So we're only allowed like 30-minute increments, and sometimes we can schedule that appointment, but if an attorney visit comes in, then we're bumped. So we have to wait, but they have made it now to where they can go through like where they would order commissary. They can now put in requests to see either me or Jessica. So if something comes up and I'm not able to see them at that time, they're now making accommodations for us. Also, we're limited with space where we can meet, but they have been allowing us to move around the jail here. So the more requests that comes in, the deputies have been excellent with accommodating us. So they can request services through the tablet.
That's great. That sounds like a great model for other people who might be working in that kind of setting. That's wonderful. Jeremy, you came off mute. Did you want to say something?
I didn't know. I assume you're working in a jail setting or a criminal legal system setting, correct?
Yes, I'm at
Right.
the,
Yeah,
Jessica and I are at the Boyd County Detention
Boyd
Center.
County.
Yes.
All right. Well, if anyone else has any suggestions on that, you could put those in the chat too. And then John, would you mind to bring up the next question? All right. Going back to Jeremy on this one. What tips are, so this is a question that was submitted. What tips or strategies do you have for talking to someone who has experienced recently an overdose?
I guess it depends on how recent, right? So if someone has just experienced an overdose, if we are on the scene or kind of come up on the scene, I mean, I would want to encourage everyone to be a little slow, right? Like people are just kind of coming to, and it's disorientating to sometimes, come out of an overdose, maybe not knowing what happened, not knowing where you're at, and just trying to figure out what is going on is a very scary place to be. And so how, if we can, and we can get emotionally aroused and charged, and then we want to come in and help, but we're moving fast because our adrenaline's going, our heart's beating, and we need to kind of take a step back and pause and try to move slow and not to kind of alarm the individual who just experienced an overdose. And now if we're talking about more so someone has just experienced an overdose in the last day or two, week, month, and we are interacting with them, I think it's individual basis. Some people that have, my experiences that some people that have had overdoses will be ready to talk about the whole experience and have that conversation. And I would encourage everyone to, express compassion and empathy with that individual, express that how we're glad that they're still here, however you express your empathy and compassion with your participants. But that's definitely how we have to lead with compassion. And I've seen people go in there and just start trying to dissect the overdose. Well, what happened? Let's play the take back. Let's, like, what are you going to do next time? What'd you learn? And it's like, just slow down. Like, let's just start with just, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're okay. What do you need? What do you need today? And how can I help you get there? Is a good place to start with everybody, but specifically with people that have had a very traumatic experience like an overdose. Not that we can't talk about it, but some people might not want to talk about it, and that's okay. But we might still encourage them to find someone they can talk to about it, but not any kind of heavy-handed anything like that. I think that's really the gist of it.
Thank you, Jeremy. We had some people putting, similar things in the chat as well. Jamie said something very similar, letting people know how grateful that we are that they're still here with us. It sounds like it's a consensus around that as a good approach. So thank you all. John, would you mind to bring up our, okay, thanks. So how can peers advocate for services? Are they able to speak on behalf of a patient, and does HIPAA get in the way? Ashley's going to take some of this question for us, but just from a technical perspective, at least at Voices of Hope, or I would say best practice for peers also in general is not speaking on the behalf of anybody, but sometimes with someone, but would be better to be with someone, but certainly not without someone unless there was a information release signed. And so sometimes there might be instances where that has to happen, but from a best practice perspective, we would start with hoping that the peer could speak on with someone rather than on the behalf of someone if they're able to speak for themselves. And I'm going to let Ashley also elaborate and give some examples of how peers can advocate for participants.
Yeah, and you hit exactly what I was going to say about the ROI. That's key, making sure that you have those signed, and because we want to stay compliant, that's really important. But yeah, there's a lot of times that peers can really advocate, like you said, either with, or sometimes they do have to do it like on behalf of their client. I remember an instance, the agency where I was placed, one of my participants, they had been kicked out. It was a shelter, and because he had an inappropriate drug screen. And I was able, it happened while I was like, wasn't there. And like, so the next day I was able to go in, talk to them, let them know like this person's been working with me. They've been doing these things. We had an ROI signed for the agency. So I was able to say all that. And I was actually able to get him to let him come back in because I mean, he was an older man. It was the winter. So it was really great to be able to get him to come back in. And a lot of my coaches are placed in like criminal legal settings. I've had coaches go to court and testify on behalf of the participant and let them know they're working on these things. I think like advocating for our participants is like one of the most important things we can do, and like helping them learn how to advocate for themselves as well. Because we don't want to be speaking like for anyone, like you said, but really giving them that motivation and that encouragement to be able to advocate for themselves, and doing that with them until they're able to.
Thank you, Ashley. Jimmy, do you have any examples of a time that you or a coach that you supervise now has been able to successfully advocate for or with a participant?
Not particularly like as a specific instance, but I know like learning collaboratives, these KY opens, like if you ever get asked to speak on any of these, like this is real-time advocacy. So I'm gonna take my chance here to say that we need more emergency housing and shelter housing in Kentucky. Like I say, like every time I do this. Yeah, I mean, just taking opportunities like this, if you're in front of a group of people, like 2 or more people, and you feel like they may not be educated as much about peer support services and the benefits, that's a time to advocate, right? When the peers are at the sites, if they're talking with the other employees of the sites, nursing staff, medical assistants, directors, if they have questions about peer support services, educating them is advocating too, because you're expressing what the benefits are. Everybody's going to have the opportunity. You just have to watch for it.
I love it, Jimmy. I love how you got that in there. I really appreciate that. And it's a good point, something to point out then is, as a peer support specialist, showing up and being on a team, you are also advocating, showing people like what it looks like to be in recovery, and breaking down stigma. Every time someone is able to identify as a person in recovery, they're doing that too. So that's great to bring up other types of advocacy, advocacy for policy change, or advocacy for reduction of stigma in general around drug use or recovery. Jeremy, were you trying to say something? I'm sorry, I can't tell.
Earlier I was just thinking about how the peers on the Voices of Hope team, HEAL team, have advocated for transportation and barrier relief and things like that, that have really been monumental for the people that have been able to utilize those services, and the outcomes have been awesome. Of people increasing their recovery capital and staying engaged with their peer support specialists or their recovery coaches. And so that was like another one that I was thinking about that was in real time here with HEAL even, and just how sometimes we can we're two things. When we think when we're advocating for services, sometimes it's on behalf of all clients or all participants, right? Like we need this service, or we need to adopt this thing or this modality or whatever it might be. But also sometimes it may make sense to us. It may make complete sense to us where we don't even understand how that would not make sense to anyone else. Adding this service or adding hours or whatever that we might be advocating for. And so I think another really good strategy or things to think about or learn as a skill is how to present information to your audience. Who is your audience? What is important? What is our value edge? What if we eliminate this or we gain this for our participants? What is the value add for the company at a large, at the large scale, or where are our talking points, basically, and kind of that's a key part of advocacy, because we can scream till we're blue in the face about needing something, but if we can't make it connect with the person who has to press the lever, we're never going to really get that lever to change. And so really knowing how to advocate is another aspect of that.
That's a great point. And so certainly for peer support specialists, for any of us, really, if you want to advocate for some type of policy change and you want to hear more about maybe strategy or how you might do that, talking to your supervisor, getting their input could be one thing you could do to try to sort of grow in that area and learn about advocacy and ways to be effective. So thank you for that, Jeremy. And I'm going to just really quickly look at the chat. Yeah, so we have someone in the chat saying that when they're in the jail settings that they feel like they are the voice for their participant at that time. And so, yeah, that's a great situation or example of a situation where somebody may really not have, much of a voice, where a peer support specialist can be really helpful. So thank you for that work. So I have a question. Does Voices of Hope have a policy advocate change committee? We do not. It's a great idea. Thank you for the suggestion. But no, we do not. John, do we have another? Okay. So we've kind of got, sort of gotten into this in terms of how to address, stigma, maybe about the peer support role in general. But what we've talked a little bit less about is, if you're a peer support specialist that advocates for all pathways of recovery, what happens when you're in settings where specific pathways may have a lot of barriers, like things like medications for opioid use disorder or harm reduction, just as examples. So Ashley, could you give us some examples of how peers can address stigma about specific recovery pathways that are held, stigmatizing views held by maybe providers and other agencies?
Yeah, I was placed in an agency where they really didn't believe in medication for opioid use disorder. I would hear people working there like make negative comments about it. And what was really important for me was to understand having patience with them, that, I may not agree with what they're saying, but if I had to like go in there and try to like argue with them, I'm not going to bring anybody onto my side. I would, just try to educate them, and I would make sure to drop into conversations that, I'm a person who's on medications for opioid use disorder, and be that example to show them that it does work, it does help people, and just continually just like, again, like just planting those little seeds in there, and I saw some people really come around, they would start to tell me some of the misconceptions or myths about MOUD that they had. And they were actually open at that point to being educated. So I think it's just really important to have that patience and just keep trying and to keep your cool, because sometimes that's hard when you're hearing somebody bash something that you're personally doing.
Thank you for sharing that, Ashley, and also for being willing to do that, for being willing, since you're able to be open about being on medication, that it's all, it's just, another way to fight stigma is when people are able to speak openly about being on medication. And so Ty, I know that you also do that, advocate and speak as a person who's on medications. And is there something you would share about that, about your own advocacy for as a person who's on medications for opioid use disorder?
Yes, I openly share that I'm on a MOUD because I think there's just such a stigma around people who are on MOUDs, like they can't stay on them, or when they're on them, they have inappropriate screens, or they don't, go far in life. And that's just not true. Those aren't the facts. People who are on MOUDs can be just as successful as anyone in abstinence. I was one of the first staff members on an MOUD that made it to management. And I think that was a really big deal because it was just like opening the pathways for everybody. And like, it was great because it was like, I was open about it. And I'm still open about it because I just want everybody to know that like MOUD is the same as abstinence, and it's just a different pathway, but you can be just as successful. I tell my team, every person that is on my team, like we're very open about like who's on MOUD and supporting each other. And I think that bleeds into, or is in the same vein towards when they go to their placements. They're very open about their own experience. I know most of my team, they're abstinence based, but they use me as an example a lot of the time. Like, I don't know what it's like to be on a MOUD. I know I'm in an MOUD setting, but hey, my boss is on a MOUD and, she does really well. So you could do really well too. And, specifically one of my team members, used me as an example to one of our participants, and this one participant ended up getting a peer support. She's doing so well now, and it's like just people knowing that you can do well and you can succeed just as well. Just having that knowledge, it just opens the doors. Because I know when I first started on an MOUD, I had no idea how far I would go or if I would be able to go any further. Like I thought I was just kind of stuck in this little box, and here I just blew the box away. And I think when more people stand up and advocate for an MOUD and identify that they are on MOUD, the greater the stigma will just go away. And that's a hope.
Thank you, Ty and Ashley, both for your willingness and to share. And of course, we know Jeremy has also been sharing through the Healing Community Study because we have seen all of the HEAL ads, so I did really appreciate all of you for your bravery and willingness to show people like what recovery looks like for people who are on medications for opioid use disorder. And somebody in the chat has said that they are on medication. They've been told they can get high from their medicine, and they receive judgment from others in the recovery community, and mentioned maybe it's a lack of education. And in general, that is another thing that all peer support specialists, I think we can do in terms of training and learning, is to really understand the medications as a tool to be able to advocate for them, so that if you understand how they work, then you're better able to explain it to somebody else. And so, Jimmy, would you be willing to just talk to us a little bit about the types of training that Voices does on medication and kind of the goals around having peers be really able to talk to, even other types of providers about how medications work?
Yes, absolutely. So we have a 2-day MOUD flyer and checklist training. And that's actually before you are even eligible as a Voices employee to be in that training. You have to do 2 MOUD prep sessions. So that's where they get with the lead recovery coach and go over different medication specifics that are outlined on the medication for opioid use disorder flyer. It's details about buprenorphine, naltrexone, methadone, the 3 FDA approved medications, how they work in the body, information about opioid receptors. There's a big analogy. A lot of you guys are probably tired of hearing this. There's a plug analogy where the opioid receptor is like an outlet, and then the appliance would be the opioid molecule that's plugging into, or the naltrexone that's covering the outlet. So they understand how the medications work in the body, and how our opioid receptors can be influenced to give our body different reactions. And just from experience, like being in a health department, some of the staff knew a lot about MOUD, some didn't. and I would actually help facilitate some of the MOUD preps when I was still at my placement. So they'd be like, what were you talking about on that meeting where you're talking really loud? You guys probably experienced that with me too. I talk really loud sometimes. Ashley gets on me a lot about that. So they inadvertently, heard me explaining the difference in medications and medication specifics, and they were interested in it. And all of our staff are extensively trained on the 3 different medications. They role play different scenarios of how a participant may be interested in naltrexone or another with methadone, and the qualifications they need to go through to get started on the medication. Yeah.
Sorry, I was checking to see what came in the chat, and John has put a link to the flyer that they're talking about. And so actually right now we're on a lunch break from one of our 2-day MOE flyer training. So we do a lot of education around here, but I do think that it helps, it can help people feel more confident and able to advocate when they feel like they really have the information to understand how those medicines work and how to address those misperceptions, like someone was saying, of people, accusing them of getting high on their medications, things like that. So that's another tool. Jeremy, what would you say for how would you think a peer support specialist could address stigma from providers? So maybe we've talked about medications, but what about just in general about maybe the role of the peer?
And you were saying stigma from providers?
Yes.
Yes. I think my approach in that when I've experienced that was to not get on the defensive or even on the offensive and try to attack or anything like that, but just to ask some more clarifying questions and be curious of where maybe this attitude or belief is stemming from, and just trying to have a conversation, and not I think not going into these conversations thinking that by the end of this conversation, I am going to have changed this person's mind. I'm going to change the whole way they practice their profession or anything like that. But I think it's an ongoing, especially when we're talking about stigma. These attitudes and beliefs are oftentimes really ingrained, and I think sometimes people in their minds also have some evidence that they are attached to. Sometimes that evidence can be real, or kind of a half truth or something like that. And so being able to explore and being able to have that conversation, and knowing, and maybe even I oftentimes like to leave interactions like that and say, hey, can we continue this conversation? I'd like to continue this conversation at a later time, or just to where it's not ever an open and shut kind of thing, where we're going to continue to nuance and massage these types of conversations. And I think really having the attitude, like we say, we're going to meet people where they are, and we say that about our participants, our clients, and our patients. And oftentimes I can forget, and I've seen other people kind of forget that, our colleagues, our partners, our community stakeholders, our family members, everyone else, I think we deserves the same kind of respect and dignity to be able to meet them where they are at and have a civil, compassionate conversation that moves in the direction of destigmatization.
Thank you, Jeremy. I think that's a great point. I think that being argumentative and combative is never like the way, right, you would like change hearts and minds, so to speak, but showing up and being an example, and knowing, having the education, over time, it does, when you see people, just living the life in recovery, if they're on medication or using, maybe a non-abstinence based approach to recovery, that it happens over time. So thank you all. And someone has messaged me that they have experienced discrimination for being on MOD and would like to share. So I'm going to give you the floor, Shirley, if you'd like to share, and maybe we'll see if the panelists have a response for you.
Thank you, Amanda. So when I initially started it, it's been exactly 2 years ago today that this happened. I had an appointment with a behavioral health clinic that was located inside our local hospital. And I'd been waiting on this appointment. It was at the height of COVID. I have PTSD, so it was really bad about that time. And I waited for almost a month and a half for this appointment for medication management and to get in to the psychiatrist. And the day of the appointment, they never called. So when I called to find out what was going on, she informed me that they don't treat people on Suboxone. And I was like, what do you mean? And I asked several times just to make sure that what I was hearing was correct. And the reason I knew this was wrong is because I'm very well educated on the American Disabilities Act. And I think that's something that all of us should know about and what our rights are as people with SUD. We are covered under that act, and I knew that. So I called the federal government and just made a complaint, and it was all settled. But it made me feel horrible when that happened. Like, it sent me probably in a tailspin, but I'm proud of myself because I'm not ashamed that I take medications for opioid use disorder, and I'm not going to let anybody else shame me for that. And I feel like being able to stand up for myself, I stood up for many others that maybe have gone before me that were not treated for their mental health and possibly passed away, and the people coming behind me, because it's not right and it's not fair. And I deserve mental health treatment just like anybody else does. And my SUD has nothing to do, how I treat that had nothing to do with them treating my mental health. They weren't treating me for SUD. I later found out that they also didn't treat people that had drug felonies and things like that. So it was completely discriminatory. And I think it's on the Department of Justice website, how that all played out. But yeah, definitely. We have to speak for our people, and we cannot be afraid to speak up and say something, especially if you know it's not right.
A lot of people in the chat thanking you for sharing that story and thanking you for your advocacy. And to be honest, I'm not really sure what the panel might add, but I'll open it up to them if anybody has anything that they'd like to say about that.
That's amazing that you used the American Disabilities Act and really went to them with it. People need to be educated about that, and people in high places need to educate themselves, because it is a very important act, and it needs to be abided by. And there's a lot of times where it's not, and there's a lot of discrimination. So I'm very proud of you, Shirley, and I'm glad that it ended up working out for you.
Thanks, Ty. And I see a question from Christy.
Actually, mine is a comment. First, I wanted to thank all of you at UAK, at VOH, and everything, all the groundwork that y'all laid in the other eight counties, wave 1. And I know wave 2 here and the next set of counties, especially, the county that I represent, Jefferson. It's so needed. And I'm just ready to go in like Shirley and advocate, because I know how much is needed, and the stigma. And so I'm just looking forward to what wave 2 do, that we get out there and make as much of a difference as wave 1 did.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Christy. We're all looking forward to wave 2. And yes, seeing, like I said, more people telling you, Shirley, congratulations for that advocacy. So that is a great example of how you can address the stigma from providers or clients. So
I just feel like, Amanda, that we talk about change all the time and we hear that constantly, but it has to start somewhere. And unfortunately, I'm in a small town and it's glared upon, and but I continue to speak out because, until the people in the recovery community start being more accepting and speaking out about this stuff, then nothing's going to change, because people only know what they see and hear, and usually it comes from our own community. So we have to be the change. We have to be the ones speaking up for it.
thank you. I appreciate it. sorry, I'm trying to make sure I'm not missing anything in the chat. But yeah, we have someone else in the chat saying they had a similar experience where a facility wanted her to stop her MOUD to be able to receive mental health treatment for them. And needless to say, that person had to get mental health treatment somewhere else. So very unfortunate. And I really appreciate you all being willing to share these personal experiences. And also for everyone who's in a place where they're able to be open about being on medication and advocate. I just really appreciate that bravery. And thank you all for, changing the world for other people. So I'm sorry you have to experience it, but I appreciate so much your advocacy. John, do we have another question? All right, I think this is our last question, so it's how we're going to kind of wrap up. And Atai, I know you had something you want to share on this one. So, how could a person interested in peer support get help?
So I always kind of advocate for my participants, especially when I started at VOH and they would come into the RCC. Not that I didn't want them to be at the RCC, but I'd always advocate that, hey, do you want to maybe see someone else, like on top of seeing me? Try a different, just like allowing them to try different people to make sure that the personalities jived and that like I was really helping them instead of it being about me. So I always tried to advocate for like, because that's how you find a therapist or a psychiatrist. The same thing with peer support. Like you kind of have to try a few people to find where you mesh, and then you will be successful. So that's what I always tried to do when I had participants. Just made sure they got the right person, and if it wasn't me, that I could get them to the right person, and that they were successful in all the goals that they wanted to lay out, because that's the whole point, is to be their cheerleader, their hype man, till they can hype themselves up.
Thank you, Todd. That was great. And we're going to just end it out with, I'm going to let Jimmy explain if somebody wants to get help from Voices specifically, what can they do?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have our website that you can request services through. We also have smart meetings in a lot of different counties. We have family and friends meetings because it specifically mentions loved ones. We also have a family support line that's available Monday through Friday, 3 to 6 p.m. All that information is on our website. And we also have meeting links on the website as well. John put the website in the chat. Thanks, John. So yeah, you can reach out to us. We also have our brick and mortar recovery community center on North Broadway in Lexington, 644 North Broadway, that you can just pop in if you are one of those face-to-face people and need some services directly. So